Good night, can you hear me?
Hey, girlie.
Okay, good. Joining from my phone.
Well, I've been here from 6, so
I think we start at 6:30.
I hope so because it's 6:30.
Okay.
I say, okay.
Yeah, let's see what's happening.
And nobody's saying nothing, and I'm just like,
I see Miguel sent something.
no, he's just saying the class. He's saying that the book is ready
The
for pickup.
books. Yeah, I saw that too.
Doesn't say anything about class.
I saw that too. I thought that was weird. So
Well,
hopefully
everybody's joining, so hopefully it starts at 6:30 tonight.
Okay.
I just about to dip out.
Okay.
Hmm.
It's 1 to tomorrow, yeah.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Hi, everyone. Just giving some allowance for additional persons to join in. So let's say we could start in another 5 minutes. That takes us to 6:43. In the interim, I would recommend everyone, if you have any questions from Module 3, we will start off with any questions or general observations, and then move into market risk. So 6:43. All right, good evening, everyone. It's 6:43, so we are live and ready to go. Trust everybody had a wonderful weekend. Certainly apologies for last week. I understood that there was some operational challenges which occurred with the communications relative to sessions. So before we get into module 4, are there any questions from module 3? Let me make sure my computer volume is working. All right, so everyone is comfortable with module 3.
Yes, sir. So far, yeah. Good.
So I understand that we had a question and it's related to module 3, correct? Is that correct?
You said somebody had a question?
No. There was an assignment. We had a question. We had an assignment that was related to module 3.
Yes, we had an assignment that was due over the Christmas that was to include module 1, 2, and 3, and we didn't start module 3 until after Christmas. And then we, some people are stressing that they were not familiar with what was needed to be used into the assignment. And then we asked if we could have had an extension, which was then denied. So, but
Delightful.
yeah, but I don't know if anybody else has any notes towards that.
This is Teresa speaking. I wasn't aware of the denial, but I know that I had a conversation with Miguel, and I sort of around the same thing, wherein we were asked to do an assignment when we hadn't covered the material, and he had expressed that the assignment should have been given to us after module 3, and so what he had said at the time was that there was going to be some internal discussions, and then they were going to get back to us. So I guess within this forum, if we can get an update on that, that would be really, really good.
I think the last class, well, not last week, but week before, we did raise it again because, you know, we did raise it again, but I think the response was, and pretty much there are prerequisites for this course, and we should have had some kind of knowledge, even though we didn't cover the material. Well, I was oblivious to what they were expecting on that paper, so so I share the sentiments of everyone else. We should not have had that prior to covering the topic.
So in essence, the assignment has been completed, but there's a sense of discomfort that you were perhaps not knowledgeable of the subject matter prior to completion of the assignment.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and everyone submitted the assignment?
Yes, we submitted the assignment.
Okay, does anybody have the assignment question? Handy?
It's in the email. I could forward it to everyone again. Let me see if I could search for it.
Yes, please, if you have it handy.
Yeah, I have the assignment. Let me just check real quick and I'll get back to you guys.
Okay, so what I would like to do is have a look at the assignment and just really give some general posture relative to how I believe the question should have been answered, and we can sort of table the approach. I'll also have some discussions with Council at BIFs to appreciate how the questions or assignment rather was addressed. So while we wait for the assignment question, there was a lot of information that was covered in Module 3. We did an overview of Modules 1 and 2, and then transitioned into 3. Of course, the fundamentals of Basel, going through the pillars, then we went into some critical elements when we looked at the risk management cycle and phases which impact the business. We talked about the quadrant and core business factors in the context of the quadrant, and how from a governance, operational, procedural, and management perspective, they should be executed and operationalized. We also talked about different methodologies of approach when it comes to looking at risk tolerances, appetite. We looked at some definitions and general terminologies. We touched on a little history of Basel, some of the core business focus when it comes to credit, when it comes to application and behavioral scorecards, KYC, customer due diligence, the structure of risk management, being that it is the discipline is still in its infancy and continues to have its incremental accountabilities and responsibilities across different industry sectors, and then looking at some of the business specific and macro and microeconomic variables which impact the discipline. There was a lot of information that we covered, and that information should have come out in your assignment, and it should come out should you were to have at least any questions relative to modules 1 through 3. Our last session particularly looked at some of the more statistical modeling with the efficiency and optimize market conditions, looking at Markowitz theory, Monte Carlo, and other research approaches relative to risk management.
Hi, just a note. I sent everything to the email.
Okay, was I copied it now?
Yes.
Okay, so let me pull it up real quick. Let's see here. Oh, I just got a vibration. All right, please note. All right, so
I had to send it twice because the attachment didn't go through on the first one. So you'll see 3 emails. The last 2 has the attachment. So the last one has exactly what was needed. And then the one in the middle, or the second to last one, would have the actual report we had to study from.
So the question is, hold on. So I'm seeing 2 attachments. One is an annual report,
Right.
Well, both of them are
Yeah,
annual.
they're the annual report. He just put it twice.
So where's the actual question?
It should be on the third email that just has CIRM assignment 2021.
Oh, okay. This is
Right.
number 40. Please complete and submit. Concentrate your assignment on the last 6 weeks. We resume.
Right.
I still don't see the question though.
You don't see it attached?
Unless is somebody else seeing the question?
Did you don't, it's not attached? Or
No, I don't have it. I don't have it. Wait, let me try expand.
yeah, I just sent it and have, hold on, wait.
No, I'm not getting it. Does someone else have the assignment?
The questions aren't attached. I think that was the first one Miguel sent, which was the wrong one, and he resent it with the questions. Let me see if I can
Right.
find it.
That's the one I just sent. I could read it right now. It says, this is the one I sent, 651, case study, 2,000 words, review the document and prioritize the main risk. That's the one I sent at 6:51 p.m.
I don't know, maybe my mobile is a little challenged. So what does it say?
It's okay. The first question was, hold on,
Oh,
my
there's
computer-
a group of questions. Okay.
right. Review the documents and prioritize the main risk. And then it says A, what are the main components of the management priority? B, what
Okay.
is your view of the risk involved? And then question 2, what are the main sources of revenue for Rio Tinto? And how do the risks you identify potentially affect revenues? And then question 3, in the report overview document provided, outline their general philosophy in respect of the hedging of their currency, interest, and commodity exposure. And then they have a part 2, which is A, what is your view of the need for the RTZ to use hedging instruments?
Oh, that's an exciting question.
Right. I guess that's why
So-
everybody was kind of like, help us.
Well, actually, you didn't even need module 3 for that.
Oh, okay.
So I can understand why it was submitted the way it was done. So if anyone has done any general type of feasibility assessment or viability review over any operational and vulnerability consideration for a type of business, you should be able to address the questions raised in the assignment. By way of, and without sort of picking on anyone, what was your general approach to answering the questions? Is there a sense of comfort in your answer? Do you feel as though when you would have gone through, and again, just taking a devil's advocate view here, after completion of module 3, do you feel as though you have a better appreciation of the question? So what was the approach? And do you think module 3 or the completion of module 3 and the review of module 1 and 2 perhaps aided in your appreciation of approach if you already completed that assignment, considering that you should have already been completed?
With me, I've never really had a problem with the with the assignment. It's the other ladies. I thought it was fine for me, just putting it out there, but I know everybody else didn't. They didn't agree with me. So I just wanted you to know that I felt like I was able to answer it prior to.
You had a sense of comfort.
Yeah, I was good because, like I say, well, I work in a bank, so we're kind of familiar with these types of stuff anyway. So the questions weren't too like far off from what I'm familiar with. So I didn't have a
Right.
problem with it.
So is anyone able to share who perhaps may have had some challenges so that I can better appreciate what are some of the sentiments? Okay, well, if anyone feels comfortable, you can write me via email. My intention is to consolidate the feedback so that I could present them at one of our upcoming council meetings to address the approach, and possibly depending on the materiality and nature of impact to yourselves, I may have to escalate it to Scotland for further consideration of their review of the assignments. So any type of timely response, like tonight or sometime this week, would be helpful and beneficial to yourselves. As I'm seeing, this is 40% of your grade. So
Yes, it is. Also, if it is being challenged, can we be aware for the other people like me who would like to know their grade? So if it's being challenged, then I can know if I should mentally prepare to do it again.
yeah, I will get some additional information on that and revert, whether directly through me or the other lecture to come for modules 5. So we will see how that progresses. I would also encourage everyone not to wait for sessions if you have any questions or concerns to raise them with me via email. You can do it privately, or you can definitely copy in your colleagues so that we can have this sort of engaging feedback relative to the questions or general observations. Yeah.
I'll say with the assignment, I felt like the handout or attachment that came with the assignment wasn't particularly helpful.
Sorry, Teresa, you're breaking up.
Can you hear me? I was trying to connect to, can you hear me? Is this good?
Could you start again? You were.
Okay, is this good? Can you hear me?
I can hear you a little better now.
Okay, I was saying that with the assignment, I found that the attachment that came with it, or the supplemental material, wasn't very helpful in terms of answering the questions. I think you could sort of scrape through with question 1 and question 2. I found that for question 3,
You're not very coherent, Teresa.
I'm off again. Hello? Hello?
Hi, Teresa.
Can you hear me?
We can't hear you.
Okay.
I think she's saying pretty much for questions 1 and 2, it was pretty much straightforward.
Hi,
Can
Teresa.
you hear me? Is this better?
Hi.
What I was saying is that for question 1 and question 2, I found that the handout that came with the assignment wasn't particularly helpful, but with your knowledge and so forth, you could sort of piece together the response. I found that with question 3, there was some degree of lack of familiarity. And so I had to seek out the financial statements for the company, and in the literature within the financial statements, I was able to see sort of what their hedging approach is, and I was able to piece together a response. I guess what I would say overall is that while I did submit the assignment, I don't think it was my best effort, or that I was sufficiently prepared to do it, if I'm making sense in articulating what my experience was. Did I lose you guys again? Hello?
No,
I think Mr. Williams is gone.
Yeah, he has, I think he was malfunctioning.
Yeah, you were clear. I heard you, but
Yeah,
I
I
don't think
heard you too.
I'm back in live. I think that may have been a technical glitch on my side. Apologies. Teresa, are you able to repeat your observations?
Okay, sure. I was saying that with the assignment, with the material that we were provided with, I don't think that is sufficiently covered or provided you with enough insight to be able to answer questions 1, 2, and 3. I found that I had to go to the financial statements of a company to sort of find out what their hedging approach is in order to be able to answer the question. And it's that level of discomfort and I guess lack of familiarity, and not covering the information in the classes that we participated in, which to me, or in my opinion, sort of placed us at a disadvantage, and particularly as it's worth 40% of the grade. I'm sure everyone is trying to get, like, you don't want to just pass, right? Everyone is trying to get the best possible grade.
Right. Okay, good feedback. Anybody else? Am I connected? I just want to make sure.
Yes, you're connected.
Okay, all right. Okay, so,
Guess that's...
right, so I take note of the feedback, and one of the things that I will firstly ask is everybody familiar with change management? I know it's a fairly new term, but fundamentally it's not really new. Okay, I will also take that as a yes. So relative to change management, what is, you are undertaking a certification, and I just want to admonish everyone, you're undertaking a certification that gives you an appreciation for how risk management navigates in the normal course. You will naturally be uncomfortable. You will naturally have limited information. I don't think there's ever been a time in the work environment, from a risk management perspective, that you have all of your key variables available to you. And that's the beauty of it. When you immerse with either the complement of risk management towards your current discipline, or purely operate as a risk management practitioner, you will find that discomfort becomes a normal element of problem solving, credibility assessments, and really just bridging the gap to align with the business strategic approaches and overall strategies, right? So I know that, and I believe I would have mentioned it before, that you would have had enough information to be able to complete the assignment, and but I do take note. There was perhaps some communications which needed to be had relative to the requisites, right? But I want you all to be encouraged that your stage or maturation in the program is certainly taken into context, and the measure of your responses is also reflective of your current stature in the discipline. So the one thing about your current studies is I wouldn't use your approach from the control view of what was my grade, but rather what did the experience teach me? What are some of the lessons learned that I can take into my normal professional life, both formal and informal, and use it as a leverage component for greatness, right? So I will take those comments into consideration and see how we can look at the refinement of the process. But yes, after having had an appreciation of the questions, I thought it was a fairly decent and reasonable question to ask any financial professional. I saw where it wanted to sort of draw out your exposure to risk management, whatever limited exposure that may be, and to have an appreciation of your attempt. That's what a lot of those, you consider those assignments, those types of assignments, more of competency assessments, rather than you should have known this, and so why didn't you put it in your response? So I will defer that observation for a subsequent time period, and either, as I indicated, revert to yourselves directly, or request that Miguel send some communications in that regard. But it's a healthy discussion and observation. So modules 1 through 3. I earlier asked about module 3. And I'm asking because of the very same thing that happened with the assignment. You're now moving on to module 4. And I trust that everyone would have read module 4, or at least started the efforts to at least read. So once again, are there any questions, concerns, or general observations from modules 1 through 3? Okay, great. So module 4 is touching on market risk. So what is market risk really all about, right? So market risk really looks at balancing the fundamentals of effective risk management. You have definitely the quadrant to take into consideration, and some of the key variables, such as the conditions in which you operate, the typology of investments. There are some cross-border factors to consider, but market. In economics, there is the principle of the free market economy. So there are market drivers which impact volatility and velocity. So we talked about those elements. And volatility and velocity is subject to often customer sentiment, definitely valuation, and other risk factors that can affect realized and unrealized gains, both financial, so more tangible, and the intangible, non-financial, more economic outcomes. So these become the performance measures for your risk-adjusted observations. You'll see here there's a focus on economic risk. And economic risk is one of those core drivers that impact your risk analysis. In previous sessions, we looked at risk analysis, which really looks at how do we optimize our risk reward dynamics. So cost benefit. Value at risk is one of those factors. We talked briefly about Monte Carlo and under the Markowitz theory, about the efficiency frontier. And the efficiency frontier is about how do you align risk? How do you align your expected outcomes with true value? Your true value or risk-adjusted profitability. So under that overall infrastructure or architecture in the design, we go back to the pillars of Basel. 1, capital, operations, market, credit, supervisory review, market disclosure, and then going through the different cycles. You're looking at the identification of risk, the measurement of risk, the assessment of it to appreciate your remediation efforts, then your control approaches or treatment, and then the ongoing monitoring. That has parallel view on the market timing and scale. These all impact factors which are outlined in your quadrant. Business, investment, legal, operational, etc. Right? And given that there is the human architecture which undergirds the entire design, stress testing, stress analysis becomes a fundamental of your risk view or posture. You will note that we talked about risk being the measure of uncertainty. And what is the uncertainty based on? The measure of uncertainty based on expected outcomes. We need to ensure that we understand the impact of occurrence, the impact of likelihood, and the propensity of risk. How realistic is it, given all of what we deem to be relevant? So market is often viewed from an investment portfolio. You'll notice Module 3 leverages a portfolio, and it's intended to teach you in that way so that you can begin applying some of the fundamentals, right, that you would have learned in 1 and 2. So this sort of competency reinforcement approach looks at your portfolio, at the investment life cycle. What is your age? Where do you land on the investment life cycle? Are you in the gathering phase, the investment phase, the contraction phase, the spending phase? And of course, it has parallel view on the wealth cycle, but the cycles are important. So appetite is one of those things when we look at behavioral analysis or physiological or economic analysis. We talked about some of the cognitive biases, herd behavior, etc. And these are important when we look at design. Design must firstly be driven by the governance component, which is really the policy, procedures, and the overall processes into how do we design the portfolio. So your appetite, are you risk acceptant? Are you risk tolerant? Are you risk neutral? Are you risk averse? And the stress testing helps us to stress the appetite, tolerances, but more importantly, it helps us to stress the outcomes so that we can determine what is expected. What will be expected if we modify interest rates across a certain portfolio? What if we modify a mix of investments across a certain customer segment? Or conversely, if we were to reverse stress test. So I would like a future value of a certain number. What do I need to do year over year among my mix of portfolio, among my mix of customers, among my mix of country risk factors, etc., to achieve the future value? So how do I reverse stress test to ascertain my present value design? Is established. You know the future value. You will note that one particular discipline in consideration is the insurance industry. So let's say you were to you are interested in a term life product that has investment values. And of course, I would encourage anybody to have living benefits. But often these are collateralization or credit securitizations for mortgages or consolidated debt. And they are death benefits, benefit to your beneficiary. I always encourage professionals to have living benefits. So we have this term life policy, and they are some of the most fundamental and methodical risk practitioners there are, because they can assess, firstly, your behavioral assessment. What do you engage in high risk activities? What is your age? What is your sex? What is your level of income? And there are certain questions that go into your health. There are certain questions that go into the environment in which you live. And all of these behavioral and application comparative scorecard assessment helps them to appreciate which design you will fit in, right? And your design then determines a cost, your economic and financial cost, which then derives the value at risk. So the higher your value at risk, often there's a positive correlation to the cost of your insurance or credit securitization. So you will notice this also when it comes to credit and lending. The higher your risk profile, the greater the cost is for your borrowing, right? The cost of your dollar is more expensive, and it's more expensive because the life cycle of a credit relationship often wants to realize its earnings or income in the short term. And so design becomes important. So that's the present value context or architecture that goes into this overall sort of stress testing or reverse stress testing. So now, when you're able to project, and we earlier sort of emphasized in our hypothetical the expected outcomes of certain investment values. So we say, okay, when you started this application at 25, and if you were to, you will initially start today, 5 years into the future, then you will start receiving these, holding all factors constant, of course, holding all factors constant. So if you are not changing any type of personal, financial, professional elements of your lifestyle, which are material in nature, then this is the value that you can have. Your value at risk is flat, or there isn't any yield impact to your current situation. And so here is the value. You are eligible for earnings or an unrealized financial position within this investment of, let's say, 10,000. So 10,000. Then in another 5-year increments, it moves to 25,000. And that could be because we are taking into consideration perhaps a more diversified portfolio. We're taking into consideration cost of living adjustment or COLA or inflation. We're taking into consideration perhaps the overall other market elements, such as higher income, maybe the sector that you're in is something that, if you're in the technology sector, sometimes, given we know there's an annualized gain or improvement, though incremental. In technology, we know that technology advances every year. We experience this with our cell phones, right? Our cell phones, they have these upgrades, and every 2 years there are more material or substantive upgrades. And again, these are very enjoyable upgrades. To some, they may be relevant, some they may not, but it increases the value, right? And so those are some of the product analyses or risk factors in that portfolio or product service context. Another area where the risk manager is going to be relevant is when variables in your lifestyle change. So I talked about it briefly. So if you, now some of these have locked-in agreements, some of them have conditional agreements. So you, quite naturally, most of them have been locked in because they've been mostly attached to mortgages, right? As we indicated earlier. But when you have variable investments, you tend to have more of an annualized or risk-adjusted performance assessment. And the performance assessment is based on the movement of the actual underlying investments or the movement in the underlying customer segment. We've seen this in pools of investments, like with your in your asset management portfolios that we see by some financial institutions like CFAL and a few others. CFAL is very well known. Kalina Financial Advisors, etc. Right? So when you think about market risk, you have to think about the velocity and volatility of the variables and the variables that impact value. So there's avoidance value, evasion value, there are stability values or resiliency values or contingency values. We may be more familiar with contingency values. For example, there's regulatory capital, which acts as a sort of buffer to flatten the insolvency curve of any business. Then you have your retained earnings, when you have a certain amount of net income or performance income, I call it rather, because there may be some periods of expected gains and periods of expected loss, but when you net the periods over whether 5-year cycle or 10-year cycle, you have an overall net gain. So your quantitative analysis takes into consideration your performance income. So your performance income or outcome, these are the buffers. These are your stability or resiliency buffers that go into the market. Now, I started talking about markets can be stable or markets can be abnormal, so normal or abnormal. And I think we know one of the leading benchmarks relative to market stability is often with the credit rating agencies. So you would have been exposed to these, I believe, in modules 1 or 2. And of course, we are familiar with S&P, Moody's, Fitch, etc. And it's interesting what they do because they have their long-term and short-term analysis of investments, both tangible and intangibles. And they give, if you were to read any of their assessment reports, you would appreciate really how they derive value. Their methodology is risk adjusted. It remains dynamic. They talk about heavily consider governance, design, and they risk weight the volatility measures. So in certain jurisdictions where there are more diverse markets and markets with higher volume, whether it be by population or a more matured capital markets with a lot of equity trading. So we see this in parts of Europe, UK, definitely the US, Canada. Unlike our BISX, which remains sort of very slow moving, so it has a low velocity daily outcome, moderate changes from a volatility standpoint, and largely due to the fact that the markets, the exchange here is really homogeneous in nature, right? So our scale is entirely different and almost incomparable to what happens globally. So even the yields, when you do the yield analysis is very limited in terms of the expected growth. So module 3, we talked about the standard deviation and the mean. And so when we look at the standard deviation, we have more of the standard deviation impact or measure of error really subjective to the impacts of COVID-19 and now climate risk. So the United Nations and G20 countries are now looking at this, and we've seen in the newspaper some of the leading indicators, but we would have already seen it in globally. For those that travel or follow the news, I would encourage you still to continue to do that. Well, we are seeing that there's going to be a natural price inflation across the entire Commonwealth. Well, we've already seen it in the Western region, and now going to impact this from a Caribbean region perspective. And so when we look at this whole concept of market risk, right? It's about value add. It's about value view, value posture. And is your value positive or negative? And when you also take into consideration your business profile, you want in this environment to now take a risk view. And the risk view is, how do I adjust my current operational framework to align with uncertainty? And that's not always easy, but it's something that you should think to remain dynamic in your respective organizations. I know when we last touched on module 3, I think the first segment of module 3, we were talking about the different organizations everyone really currently employed, and how when we look at the design of policies, procedures, processes, well, firstly, if we were to stick a pin in that, one of the first things we need to be able to see is a clear separation between the 3 domains, because often the policy is a procedural framework. And there's this view that the board is in fact approving procedures when the board should approve policy. If you find that your board or executive management team, senior management team, there's different management tiers and hierarchical structures in different organizations, because there's also the C-suite, right, or senior executive leadership, they often term themselves. And when you see that there is this approval of procedures at very high levels, understand that they are not being strategic. And it impairs the ability to have an effective posture towards any risk-adjusted profitability, performance, or just general approaches. The word that we use today is agility. Is my operations agile to align with market conditions? COVID has taught us that we have to invest in technology. We have to invest in the human architecture to align with the need for remote working, the need for persons who, yes, skilled labor, but I have children that need to go to school, so I have to invest in the technology. I have to invest in the right bandwidth. I have to be able to still reach my customer segment and still have a synonymous level of impact. So I say synonymous because it's not going to be the same. You find in our jurisdiction there's a very steep learning curve with reality, and often there has to be the shock to adjust behavior. So there's this herd behavior, and all of those persons who are not certified professionals tend to give the more pervasive and intrusive advice that everyone seems to follow, particularly because it's often free and some persons appear to have gotten results. But the true measure is we have to be strategic, we have to be agile. We've seen this in the implementation of the vaccination, the booster. Bahamians, my wonderful Bahamian people, we decided to consider the vaccination only when we had to travel. Otherwise, there was complete apprehension and resistance from vaccination. There was another view of, okay, I want to be able to maneuver and go to restaurants and this type of thing, notwithstanding the measure of those who have very legitimate health considerations, by all means are in fact exempted, but only on principle, because by rule, we are not doctors. And so it's important for us to take sound advice and judgment from the appropriate medical professionals. So separate and apart from COVID-19, what we've also seen was, well, thankfully we've been delisted from the EU's blacklist. Hooray, the developments of our sand dollar, digital currency, not blockchain, technological advancements. I think there may have been some confusion about our efforts to align with blockchain technology and the whole digital currency space, notwithstanding that we do have some legislative groundbreaking measures by our very own 242. But the global environment from a market context, and when we think about the storeholder value, when we think about the conduits of exchange for commerce, there's been so much lack of agility in our jurisdiction. And I think more and more we're going to be able to see that. And the elements of risk management will continue to be really just an exciting discipline, because you're the one who are going ahead into the forefront of the unknown. There's so much excitement, there's so much marginal level of optimized return because the window of true earnings is those who are willing to accept the risk beyond what they can see. Because once it becomes in reach, there's a limited measure of wealth that is distributed to all. So it's something to think about. But market risk is all about architecture. It's all about the constant incremental measure of sophistication over time, and the designing the methodologies across different varying levels of market conditions. So I will stop there for a moment. Does anybody have any questions so far? So I see this is a crew that loves to listen.
No.
No. I was just gonna
Go
say
ahead, Dee.
something. No, you will go, Shara.
No, I liked how you alluded to the fact that our local exchange is, where pretty much, I guess we can't play with the big boys, but why is that exactly? Because there's a lot of people, trying to decide if to invest in this and invest in that. So what's the relevance, and do you think that would change over time when we look at market risk?
So your question is in relation to our current exchange. When we look at our current exchange, you're asking why is it flat?
Yeah, because still, even when you go on Facebook, you see they're still advertising, they're still encouraging you to invest. So why invest in something that's not, producing?
Okay, so let me answer the first question, because you really have two questions. One, why is it flat? And then two, why does it appear as though it's not producing? So I want to approach it like that. Is that okay?
That's fine.
Okay. So why is our market flat? I believe, based on my very limited observation, and I say limited because it's really been just a few years, about maybe just 10 to 15 years just observing the market. It appears to be flat because of the level of volume participation, and the fact that when we think about market is also economics.
Mm-hmm.
So we are a consumer-driven nation where we don't produce anything. I mean, there's been efforts here and there with BAIC, but and other perhaps more innovative industries to mitigate perhaps the net imports of different sorts of goods with construction and perhaps maybe even when we think about fisheries with the exports, we've seen other products that have been transported from our jurisdiction and marketed and packaged and resold here. And then there's also sports income that is very slow moving, but it doesn't touch our country's balance sheet. So think about, sorry, we having some feedback? Miguel or someone, could you put your mic on mute, please?
That's Miguel.
Yeah, I think that's what's happening. Let me see if I could do it. There you go. Yeah, so when I look at the country's balance sheet and the very limited channels of income producing elements, so both financial and economic, there's very limited money supply and cyclicality of the money supply across different products and services. that's one part of it. The other part of it is also there's education. One, education and awareness. The other part that I don't often like to talk about, which is attributed to our money supply, because what we do with every income generated, I think there's a rough estimate that most families tend to export or spend abroad almost 40 to 60% of that. So the retention of wealth in the country is depreciated by our very own behavior. Because you need money to make money. So there's another factor of the homogeneous product. The scale of competition, one, when we look at the entry or barrier to entry, you have the very same players, the same financial professionals appear to be the same ones talking about everything that is a dominant factor. And then you have these sort of, almost safe to say, monopolies and oligopolies, which to some extent is still a perfectly competitive landscape. So the margin of wealth, when I talked about the margin of wealth, it's very thin to spread across so many different players. You often see indicators such as the interest rates. If we look at BGRS or BGS T-bills, we haven't seen any extremely high levels of return from these sort of government fixed income securities. Then when you go into the equity markets, we know that most of the entities, they just, unless you're a utility company, there's very low yields below 1%. When you go into capital markets, with the banks, you see, well, we already know there's very little earnings on savings, very little earnings on deposits. And so these are all the measure of the current financial economic conditions. When we look about jet to GDP and some of our efficiency ratios at a country level, you're able to see it. So that's macro, and then you're able to see it from a micro segment, drill down to our exchange, and you get the results. So the results are the results. Quantitative is often behavioral driven. When we even look at legislation, design, once again, our design is limited to our sphere of knowledge and exposure. And so what do we have? We have a lot of design for certain typologies of business. There's capital markets, we have all the banks. There is tourism, wonderful hotels that support foreign direct investment. Still a very slim spread of the earnings which go through the banks on the syndicate loans. I mean, there's offshore banking too, but the scale of public to private sectors is still very low weighted. And then if we were to go back to equity, algo markets, real estate, then you go into securitization, Kalino, and the rest of it, that securitizes the very same product at the top of the house. Then you go into what your more Class A shares and different more type of maybe equity income and term deposits. So it's, when you really look at it, it's a perfectly competitive market, homogeneously scaled, minimal distribution of wealth, the money supply. When you look at some of the income and capital outlook from the Department of Statistics or the Central Bank from the monthly, annual, and quarterly digest, you're really able to appreciate, like, wow, we're really doing this to ourselves. And I don't think anybody's really talking about it. Now, that is sort of a combination of the questions in one snapshot. So the level of participation, again, why is it flat? And then why doesn't it appear to be generating? There is generation. There is generation. So what you have is there's a value at risk because the cost to participate increases year over year because your buying power on the very same dollar changes, certainly in relation to the market or economic conditions. So fine, I got some shares, let's say hypothetically, in the capitals market at what, $2 a share, and now it's 14. And that took me what, let's say a 5, that's over a yield of what, 5-10 years. Coming now into in the future, you're now present, available, willing. But again, market investment has to have 2 factors: willingness and ability. I'm willing, I want to, I have an interest, but am I able? Right, so it goes into those factors. There's some other things at an individual and institutional level when it goes into really just discipline and overall just your personal posture, but it's really a journey. It's going to take some serious levels of impact. I think there's a tremendous amount of education and awareness. I just think a lot of people just don't get it. And I think when they do, it's usually often at the investment life cycle when they're on their spending phase. So the next generation within that family or institution tend to be the ones to sort of benefit from the lessons learned. This is just my own personal view, though. I think there was another. Sorry, did that answer your question? Hi.
I'm so sorry, it wouldn't unmute, but yes, you did. Yes, you did. Lack of participation. Thank you so much.
Okay, was there any other question? I think someone else was asking a question.
It kind of answered my question. I was just wondering, basically, why we would have to resort to, why isn't it just like a steady, like fixed rate or fixed, it was the same thing. It was basic. I got my answer.
I like your question though. Let's build on that. The steady or fixed wealth. Like what? Like
yeah, because like we was talking about inflation and stuff like that. So I was just trying to figure out why would, if we have a certain amount of product, I understand sometimes products are, the sellers become a little bit like because of the demand and stuff like that. But then I'm pretty sure would a company take in consideration of that risk to continue to, I guess it depends on the money.
So you're asking a couple questions here. So So if I'm hearing you, what I'm hearing is how do we stabilize how do we stabilize a reasonable level of the market, notwithstanding the current demand supply factors, which resulted in being flat, and have companies looked at some of the market stimulus to address the deficiencies. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, you said it correctly. Sorry.
Okay. So a stabilization would be, in our environment, we typically use the prime rate. The prime rate is often the ROI, or an investment level of return, associated with most of our investment structures, whether they be government fixed income security, equities, or anything from the capital markets, like fixed income, even across different sectors. And so where there is concern in the money supply, or this sort of elasticity of concern within the consumer or private public sector, you often find an adjustment in the prime rate, or there are often relaxations or restrictions. So we'll see that if you follow the current suite of government fixed income securities, you'll observe that the central bank has, of course, due to the poor country level performance, to junk status, triple B, we're paying, the government is promising high levels of return in the short term outside of the current capital and equity markets. And that's often largely due to the fact that the cost of borrowing externally with the IMF or the IDB, which is why if you follow the news, you'll notice there's now talks about the EU placing us on this sort of gray or blacklisting relative to BEPS, which looks at the provisions relative to tax structures. And so there's some talks about that. In fact, the IDB, interestingly, early this year, well, we're still early, but early in January and sometime in December, talked about looking at providing the Bahamas with a certain level of capital investment to support the sort of unfavorable shifts in the economy, to operate as a stimulus, provided that we begin now looking at our tax regime. The value-added tax was implemented with very low levels of elasticity that the talks in the developing countries, and more so with the governing organizations like IMF and the World Bank, it's all about helping the government to really look at what those structures would mean for us. Are we going to?
Sorry, just a second. So would that be determined on like the world stock market, or market, like the world's rate on what would be considered reasonable for all countries or for all, I don't know.
Well, no, you said it right. And
Okay.
so if you think about it, it is about, I am looking at your country. So view us as, we are the round table, we are the IMF, we are the IDB, and we're the World Bank. So we're saying, instead of you trying to borrow, right? Let's help you look at different ways to create your own country level resiliency measures. So most Bahamians would object to a tax regime because it's like, oh, I'm being taxed. This is not the US. 5 decades ago, I've never been taxed before. Oust the government type of conversation. But if people really pay attention to it, these kinds of discussion help you to become more self-sufficient, because there's the word that I'd used earlier was change management. So it's changing behavior, how we spend, how we invest. I'm not an everything smoking going to Florida or just traveling in general, because I think the rite of passage of Bahamians, or being a Bahamian, before you're able to call yourself a full-fledged Bahamian, is you have to walk through the doors of Walmart in some of the Florida states or some part of the US, but just even touching the US soil. And like, even from infancy, you just sort of learn, I'm not going to purchase locally. I could get it cheaper elsewhere to save $1. So there's some appreciate what's happening in the market. The local merchants have to price based on volume, based on turnover, sales turnover, based on their target market. I have a store, I'm on the northern end, and by the time you drive, let's say 3 to 5 minutes south, you see the very same store. So, the scale of competition also drives price down, and things like this. So there are certain market conduct that we don't think about. We just issue licenses and just say pay taxes. So you're going to need some risk practitioners at the table that really look at the details and say, okay, I don't want us to do what we did in the US, that price the wealthy or more affluent, or charge them a higher level of tax, because what happens is they own the businesses and they just transfer it down to the very consumer. Or do we want to weight distribute it by consumption, which is what we're doing with the value-added tax? That's worked regionally, and that's largely due to the fact that we don't produce anything. But there's different ways. We can treat it. I'll leave some of that discussion for the Chamber of Commerce and some of the other roundtable discussions currently going on with the Economic Recovery Committee and such. But these are the things that we need to talk about in the context of market risk, right?
Yeah, I also have a little piggyback question off of that. I was doing some research, and me and my dad was kind of watching the economy in Africa, and then we came across this video of the president of Ghana, who is now cutting all ties with export of cocoa to Switzerland. who normally produces the best chocolate in the world now. So now they're cutting off those ties with Switzerland and now going to produce their own chocolate. As a risk manager, how would you assess a company or several companies or a country that was so heavily depending on another country to supply its source of income? Because it kind of mind boggles me for mine, because it was just like, that's everybody now. They have to now find either another source of making money, or try to beg and plead for this connection to be immersed, So I was just like, what would you do in that situation like that?
Sorry, are we connected? Just making sure.
Did you hear anything I said?
Oh, I did. No, I did. It just, I think the way your mic went out, I wasn't sure if we lost connection.
Oh, no, it's still there. Sorry.
Okay. No, that's fine. That's fine. So it's interesting you brought that up, because much of the key economic relationships between Africa and Switzerland, I mean, these have been bilateral relations, I mean, for centuries, right? And so you had more of a sort of decolonization between, I mean, rather, these continents, people, cultures, and if you think about the Brexit position with the UK and the EU environment, it was something similar, and it largely had to do with kind of almost like what we did here. It's about establishing independence. There is a position that, okay, Africa has established a sufficient level of comfort in their ability to provide food, money supply, energy, water, the basic needs, to the point where they no longer need to apply a cost or value at risk on their dollar across countries. So there's also the view on trade. When they look at their trade and their trade exports, because they've been largely exporting much of the commodities, right? Typically, your more precious metals, in addition to high consumption, I would say rather, agricultural goods. You'll see this need for more of the Western world. There's a higher earnings potential for direct, so it's like cutting out the middleman. And if you think about the context of colonization, it's really due to certain people of lighter hues coming in with great ideas and being wowed by slide presentation, because I've never seen a slide presentation before. And you brought me some shoes that I never knew my feet could feel so comfortable. And so you sacrifice comfort for sovereignty. And I think countries like Africa are now starting to see the light. Without getting into too much of the information, it's interesting you brought that up, because I've read 1 or 2 articles some time now, and yes, it was in fact on the media. And it really helped you to appreciate, you saw an increase in the earnings when you looked at the US stock exchange, because Starbucks shares went up by, I think, a 5% yield, largely due to the fact that their cost measures begin to be a little bit more optimized, and the use of technology with the apps, etc., and this kind of thing. So yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, their risk appetite had to do, in my view, I think they looked at their country's balance sheet, they looked at their earnings potential, they looked at cost, and they considered that they were willing to accept the risk that perhaps maybe they may not get the large chunk of benefit right now, but perhaps maybe in another decade or two, their children and children's children. Countries like Africa that have rich, deep cultures, they tend to think more longer term because their socioeconomic status is on a lower table compared to ours, notwithstanding we are a developing country. Interestingly, when we also when we take into account the fact that they have a very rich focus on education and really this fearless energy of living abroad, you can almost find Africans everywhere. And they are willing to really participate in any type of discipline that is income generating. So what am I saying is you have a very broad population of Africans working globally. They're sending remittances. They built their income of their country's balance sheet initially on remittances. They have been leveraging heavy with trade, and given the need now for increasing focus. Let's also consider that there's a bit of benefit that Africa and the more middle tier sort of trade-driven continents or countries are benefiting from the poor relations between the U.S. And China. You know, this sort of barrier or struggle between them, even with Russia now, with the cost of oil and this whole go green, this whole concept. It's about everything. How do I access pure, unsolid commodities within the shortest distance, reduce cost, both insurance, price, manpower, time. So my overall sort of value at risk or risk-adjusted profitability impact factors then become more on one flattening curve from an insolvency standpoint, but then very beneficial in the long term. So that's my take on it.
Awesome.
Did anybody else wanted to add to perhaps what they may have seen in the news or just generally in the papers? Yes, no, maybe so. Okay.
No.
Sorry, somebody was saying something?
Sorry. No, nothing.
Okay. So let's see if I can get a risk question for Sunday. So as a risk professional, how does one effectively balance the upcoming Super Bowl on Sunday and the imminence of Valentine's on Monday? Because there's a balance of income, energy, and effort that we have to think about here.
Well, I know that could be a rough weekend.
Well, you have to consider your risk appetite. I mean, are you risk adverse? Do you want, so you have to be smart. You can combine and have a Valentine event. You make it a date, because then if you choose one, the opportunity cost, you must weigh the cost of giving up your Valentine's Day for the Super Bowl. So I think you must
Oh,
assess
but who
your,
man? I got with my man to know. No, girl, just gonna be long. I wasn't gonna go. I wasn't gonna do it. I'm so sorry. He got to figure out how he could do the two, because I can't. And many consumers are gonna be like, no, no.
So he has to do the two.
Got to. He have to do the two. I mean, I glide him. A lot of singles do meet, so I guess it could be a good venture for people to have like a Super Bowl party, because I know my cousin met her husband at a Super Bowl party, so I can see where the benefits do come if they do the eventing properly, like how Sharella was saying. But I do know, me as a non-single lady who has a whole boyfriend, I need to go on my own date while you go to the Super Bowl another date.
see, I'm speaking, see, I'm married with kids. So, let's make it an event.
It's interesting, and I like the two factors there, right? Because if you think about it, your risk posture is relative to the individual or the profile whom have to make the decision, right? So it's always subjective to the circumstances, and neither position is wrong. But what I will ask is, how do you balance? How do you effectively balance it? Because, okay, there again, you've given me your personal position, but you've not given me your risk posture on how to balance the level of income being spent versus the expected ROI of enjoyment during the weekend. So when you compare someone who's single versus who's in a relationship, and then there's another tier who's married, right? The ROI is different, the level of energy is different, and the level of expenditure is different. So I could see an inverse relationship being when you look at the level of ROI compared to the amount of money being spent for the weekend. Conversely, with the more money being spent, there could be a lower level of ROI. So it's an interesting conversation, right? And then what is your desirable ROI? Am I more weighted towards Super Bowl from a masculine male view, and lesser weighted from a feminine female view, and more weighted feminine female view for Valentine's, and less weighted male masculine Valentine's?
I'd say from a risk point, I would try to target, I would try to target the more heavier percentage of people who are most likely to participate in the weekend itself. As in, it's a, like you say, it's a dual weekend where it's Valentine's and Super Bowl. And then just look at the fact that who would win in this like in this scenario, who would win? Would it be more of the males gonna win this time, or is it gonna be the females? And to really look at it, most men do have relationships or situationships. So I would try to target something that'll be more easier for the man to accommodate both his desire to watch the Super Bowl and his point or his reference to make sure that the female he's with is also satisfied at the same time. So I'd really target mostly um, men in this situation because they would still have the ultimate decision to decide if they're gonna, if they're gonna watch the game or they're gonna go out. So could create something that where they could do both, or make it, or um, or make it where it's where he would feel as if missing the Super Bowl would be a good choice that that weekend, you know, because it's really about the girls, honestly. Because at the end of the day, do you want to hear them out, or do you want to watch the game? You know, because it's just like it's Valentine's weekend as well. So I would try to look at that.
So that's the hypothesis, the mouth or the game. Okay.
Exactly.
That's very interesting. Anyone else care to share? That's an interesting risk analysis of the weekend. I think there's clearly a biased position here with Shirella. I see a heart up. But I like that view though. You say it's dependent on the male. I believe there may be some position on objection to that, but that's interesting. Okay.
I think this weekend is actually a win-win. Valentine's is actually on Monday. The Super Bowl is on Sunday. So the male can get to watch the game, and they have the day before and the day after Super Bowl, which is Saturday and Monday, to make up to the female. So I don't see a big risk there.
Now that's an interesting view. It's a win-win. But I could throw in a variable here. After I may love myself, because Super Bowl isn't just about the day, it's the pregame. So I too tired for Monday. And I could just try combine this thing in one also to save it. I could combine this in one to save $1. So
No, see, that's the problem. It ain't that kind of win for you. It's a win for both of us. You being the male. So it can be a case where only
so
you,
funny.
the male, is winning in this scenario. If I'm a female who do not enjoy watching the football, save for the halftime event, I'm not going to watch the football game with you because that's not something I enjoy. I may go to support you because I understand and I appreciate that that is something you like to do. However, that's not something that I want to do. So you as the male have to then reciprocate and do something that you know that I would enjoy or like to do or can appreciate.
that's an excellent view. And you know, I think when notwithstanding, we're talking about Super Bowl and Valentine's, right? It's these very same types of discussions that should translate into different tiers or layers depending on the discussion forum, depending on your personal or professional environment. You want to have the view on how do I make the informed decision? How do I ensure that I take all variables into account? And then what is my values model, right? You'll often find that you could be at the office, you could be at home, whether it's, personally or professionally. And as you're making decisions, it tends to become very subjective to the individual, or rather the values model of the individual. So you want to pay attention to that. That's why I often will talk about risk management from the governance view. So who sets the tone? Who establishes the parameters on which we should operate and remaining agile? So I like the balanced position on Valentine. You got both days, you got the male and female view, you have the ROI. So there's a reasonably risk-rated distribution on benefit between the two. Then you have the risk tier, or sort of categorization at the individual. What is the risk posture at the individual level? Your non-married but still relationship, then married. Then there's this other category of situationship. So there's often the ability, as I indicated, it's the very same approach to what you do. So bringing it back home, when we look at this concept of market risk, you're going to really have to take the step back. I like the discussion about the exchange. It was an interesting view on the cross-border consideration and what's happening globally. And I also like the discussion we had relative to what's happening right at home, coming out of the papers recently, and what's happening at the Ministry of Finance, AG's office. I would encourage everyone to look at digital currencies and cryptocurrencies, etc. These are the emerging market considerations. It is certainly a bit of learning curve, but again, where there's risk, there's opportunity. And then when it comes to the question about exchange, yields, and volume participation, I would encourage everyone to at least go out there, take the risk, and get a very low tier investment, whether it just be $100 in BGRS or a few shares on the stock exchange, and understand your own personal formula of how it works. And that way you'll be able to speak to it with a certain level of aptitude and comfort for yourself. You also have the other opportunity of your learning curve and developing your own formula for personal and financial success. So if there are no other questions, I see we are at the 8:30 mark. I will bid you all adieu. But it was a great discussion. Any questions on market risk from what we talked about?
No questions for me.
No questions.
Okay, guys. Well, have a good weekend. Enjoy your Super Bowl and Valentine's, and yes, until we meet again. So please continue to read and apprise yourself as we are getting ready to soon to anchor the finish of modules 3 and 4.
Awesome.
Okay, guys, take care. Have a good one.
All right. Good
Good
night.
night, everyone.
Everyone have a good evening.
Yes, baby.